I got you guys here.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to introduce our speaker for today. His name is Stephen Kurkjian. Did I get it right, Steve? And he's here to speak about the heist at the Elizabeth Stewart Gardner Museum and his book, The Master of Thieves. So please welcome Stephen. I'm looking forward to
Thank you. I understand you folks are going, some of you are going tomorrow to the museum, and I congratulate you on it. It's a terrific museum with an extraordinary history beyond this awfulness that happened to it in 1990 and continues today to be a mystery. When my book came out in 2015, I like the sort of the eeriness, the mystery of and the rip, given the theft, but I didn't like all these words about greatest art heist, Boston's, blah blah blah. I wanted it to be Boston's last best secret. That's what I wanted it to be, the subtitle here. But they said to me, no, Steve, that's too parochial. People won't be interested in that. It's too parochial. And then I was sort of surprised by that because this whole story is framed by what I call superlatives. This is the largest art theft in world history. Yeah, wow, it is. Thank you. I mean, think in terms of world. You know, that's beyond Route 128, beyond 495, 95 even. It's beyond there. It's big, big. History. It's not just this century or the past, our 20th century. It's for all time. And the artwork that was involved here is artwork of the ages. Let me just show you what I'm talking about. 13 pieces were stolen that night on March 18th, 1990. And like I say, it's the largest theft, largest heist. This alone is a Vermeer called The Concert, is worth $200 million. If you could sell it, which you can't, and sell stolen property. Most of you people know that. Most of you people know that. This is taken from the Dutch room at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Vermeer was a renowned painter of his time, 17th century, Dutch painter. He only did 35 in his lifetime, and only one is missing, and that's this one from the Gardner Museum. The one that I consider breathtaking for its visual is this one. This is Rembrandt, Storm on the Sea of Galilee. Rembrandt was much more prolific, around a little bit earlier, but much more prolific, a Dutch painter as well. 500 are attributed to him. But this is the only one that he painted the sea in. And if you look at this, well, here, I mean, you get too close to this, you're going to get wet. That's how vivid it is. It's a biblical scene, Christ in a storm on the Sea of Galilee. New Testament, Christ is shown right in the middle here, in a face of repose, his disciples all around him, one sense of terror or another because they're in this storm on this boat. Rembrandt loved the painting so much, he painted himself. Here is he, leaning over the gunwales, losing his lunch. And this too is stolen. This too has been missing. You know, and again, the last best secret, revealing secrets, is something that my career was spent, important secrets my career was spent on. I was an original member, founding member of the Globe Spotlight team. And the Globe still has a Spotlight team, still does terrific investigative reporting. And it's reporting why I was compelled to this story is because of my history in the Spotlight team. The Spotlight team spends a lot of time in stories that have a purpose for the community. Beyond the headlines, beyond the bad guys we catch, or the bad people we catch or expose. It has a larger purpose. And 2015, the year my book came out, the two movies of the year that year. One was Black Mass. Both these movies were based on stories that had been done by the Glow Spotlight team. Black Mass was started as an expose that looked at James Whitey Bulger and the secret alliance he had with the FBI that allowed him to do some pretty murderous things as a gangster in Boston, because the FBI was getting pieces of information from him about other gang members. So that's, but let me tell you, Whitey was taking full advantage of it if you've seen the movie. So that was that story was broken by the Spotlight team. 14 years later, they got on the story that I had some work to do on a movie called Spotlight. It became a movie called Spotlight, and it was the movie of the year in 2015. And what was that movie about? The clergy abuse scandal. That so many parishes throughout our archdiocese here in Boston had kids who were abused by priests. And instead of reporting the abusing priest to the police, the church decided they didn't want to bring scandal upon the church, so they covered up. They moved them to our other parishes, hoping they wouldn't do it again. And as we know, they did it again and again and again. Well, that story too was broken by the Spotlight team. And forget the awfulness of priests doing terrible things and having to be punished for that. You know, that scandal went deep into an institution that was not able or willing to tell the story itself. It took a team of reporters, independent reporters, to do it. So I felt this story had legs as well, that there could be greater purpose in getting these paintings back. The museum was opened in 1903, and when it did open, it was the largest collection of art in a museum that was privately owned. And this is the private owner, Isabella Stewart Gardner. She was a New Yorker, came to Massachusetts, and married her roommate's brother, John Jack Gardner, who was one of our wealthiest businessmen and, at the time, shipbuilder from Beverly. They had one child in the mid-1800s. The boy died, and the doctor said to her, you've got to get on with your life. And she said, well, I love to travel. So her husband started to take her on these world tours. I mean, they were pretty well settled in Boston. Everyone knew her. She had a flamboyance about her that was renowned. When she came to Boston, they said, everybody here is Episcopalian. And she says, well, I'm a Buddhist. And she would have these grand parties at their home up on Beacon Hill. And she wouldn't have the politicians. She wouldn't have the big mucky mucks, the businessmen. She'd have the writers and the actors, the lion tamers. Once she came upon a little bit of a pet zoo, right, that was right on Boston Common, and she put a leash on the lion, and she walked the lion up Tremont Street. So she had a lot of life to her. And but as she traveled the world over in the late 1800s, she began to buy art and appreciate art. And what she and her husband decided to do was to build a museum. And the reason why she did it was a transcendent reason. That was to bring art to America. She wanted us and our parents and grandparents and us and our children and grandchildren to have an appreciation of art. Why did she have that? Was because as she traveled the world over, she went to China and Japan and the Middle East. It wasn't just the European capitals she went to buy the art. She went all over, and she saw these civilizations that were once, you know, major centers of the world at the time. BC and AD periods. And these civilizations had long passed on the Byzantine Empire, the Ottoman Republic, the Shang dynasty. These had all passed on. But what remained that people cared about these these civilizations, was the artwork that they produced. So she wanted that for us, America. America was steaming ahead in the late 1800s. We were becoming a world power. Economically, we were a locomotive in the Industrial Revolution. But she said we don't have an American tradition of art. She wanted to develop that, inspire that. So she had this collection. And I like to measure how successful it is. One way is this. This is a statue celebrating artistic achievement in front of the Boston Public Library. This is the Dartmouth Street entrance. And these two stone fronts have the names of 8 of artists of the ages. Raphael, Velasquez, Michelangelo, Donatello. These are the 8 artists of the ages. 6 of those artists have their works on display at the Gardner Museum. So she had a complete collection when it opened in 1903 with great, great celebration. And again, one of the first things she did was she had a program to bring Boston school kids in. The place was free of charge. You could come in, walk through. If you wanted to give a donation, fine. If you didn't, you wanted to take it in, fine. And she had this program to bring the Boston school kids. I don't remember myself going in, but my personal story about this relates to my father. My father was an artist, a commercial artist, and he was a survivor of the Armenian genocide, came to the country in early 1920s, settled like every other Armenian who came at the time in Watertown, and they realized in high school that he had a gift. I call it the drop of mercurochrome. And he and 2 cousins had the drop of, they became pianists, he became an artist. But he would go every afternoon after his art lessons to the Gardner Museum, and he would study the masters to see how they composed, how they gave their depth of field, how the light enters into the paintings. And he learned from them. So her reason for having this museum, still there today, succeeded, at least from my own personal perspective. Now, her passing, though, in mid-20s, sowed, I think, this is an unfair statement, but I think it's true, sowed the seeds for what was to come, the theft that was to come. Her will said that nothing can be changed inside the museum after her death. So it stayed a timepiece. And as a result, the gentlemen, the trustees who took over the operation of the museum really didn't have much to do to keep the museum up. Like any nonprofit, it survives and it improves itself by the money being raised by the trustees and the people who go to the museum. Well, they weren't raising money from any donations. She wanted donations to be tickets to be free. But they said, well, we don't need any money. We don't have to buy any new artwork. Your library your library needs money to buy new books. So the trustees raise money from there, however they do it, to buy new books. Well, these men didn't have a need to buy new books, to buy new paintings. So the museum began to fray without the influx of revenue. And by the mid-20th century, it had really begun to fray. It was no longer what it had been, which was the diamond in the crown of Boston's art or culture scene. It had gotten frayed. And they hired the first security director in around 1980, and he later told me that he was shocked by how poor the security and the condition of the insides of the museum had gotten. What did he mean? He said, well, on summer mornings, hot summer, which there was humid nights, he would come in and there would be moisture building up on the artwork because of the humidity. And he said we'd have to throw all the windows open and get all the fans in. It didn't have any central climate control system. And so he went to the directors, trustees, and said, it's going to cost us $500,000, but we've got to do it to save the paintings from any damage. So they did. They raised the money in the mid-1980s. They put in the climate control. He went back to them the next year and said, listen, we're in the danger here. This building is so old. It's the same pipes that we have here as we had in the 20s. In a cold winter's night, one of these pipes bursts, we could ruin some paintings. Or, what he was really worried about, is a smoldering fire. What they had on their ceilings was the same 9-volt batteries that we no longer, thankfully, have in our houses. We have, fire systems, more improved fire systems. But he feared that there would be a catastrophe from a broken water pipe or a smoldering fire that would get out of control. So he said, we need $50,000 to buy a fire alarm system. They said, we don't have it. So he went out and raised it himself, and he put the fire alarm system in. But it wasn't a fire alarm, or it wasn't a cold winter night that caused the catastrophe of March 18th, 1990. We're talking around 1 o'clock in the morning, and I think that they picked that day or that time purposefully. You remember what March 17th, the day before, would have been, the holy holiday of St. Patrick's Day. And there's lots of cops. Every cop who's available is on the streets, making sure the streets are safe during the day. So the ones who are working the overnight shift from midnight to 6, they're going to have worked, they will be on an overtime shift. They would not have been as alert. It didn't really come into question because no one was alerted that this was going on. These two men with their false mustaches, these are them with the mustaches and then without. There are no photographs of them. There's only sketches. They ring the side doorbell of the museum, and you will see that when you go tomorrow. And they say to the night watchman who's on duty at the desk, this is the front, the entrance is on this side now, but back in the day, this was the employee entrance. So they ring this side doorbell. And they say, there's a disturbance inside, we're here to investigate. Now, the man, a 23-year-old who was on duty that night, had been on the job for about a year. And he was a pretty savvy kid, maybe even a little bit too much of a know-it-all. But that wasn't his problem. His problem was that he wasn't committed to being the best security agent in the world, night watchman in the world. What he's committed to is being a rock and roller. He had come to Boston the year before. He had dropped out of Berkeley, and he had started his rock and roll band, and they were playing in some of the seedier bars of Brighton and Allston, where he lived. And he worked this night shift, this midnight to 7 o'clock shift. He loved the shift because he said, I could play rock and roll with my band at the clubs, jump in the cab, and get to the museum at midnight. He said he acknowledged I was often stoned, I was often drunk, but it didn't matter because nothing ever happened. The place was quiet. In fact, the place was so quiet, there was a second night watchman on that night, not an important, he doesn't have an important role here, but they said to him, this is the first time he had ever worked the night shift. He had been a guard during the day. But they said to him, bring your trombone. He was going to college, he was going to music school as well, and he was a trombone player. They said, bring your trombone, you can practice during the night, because nothing ever happens. Well, here we are at 1 o'clock in the morning, and these two gonfalons are ringing the doorbell. Now Rick, this is Rick, Rick was at this desk. This is the security desk at the museum at the time. It's much more sophisticated now, thank God. He's here. This is the security desk, and he's behind here. This is the public area of the security desk. He hears these two guys tell him, and they have a walkie-talkie. They're on the outside. They have a intercom. Say to him that they're here to investigate a disturbance. Let us in. And he knows he's already done the rounds inside the museum from midnight to 1 o'clock. He had done the rounds, and he knew there was nothing going on inside the museum. But what he thought in his mind was that some kids had jumped over the back iron fence at the museum and were doing some hooliganism in the backyard of the museum. Again, this is now 1:15, 1 o'clock in the morning. He doesn't have a camera out there. He does have a camera that shows the two men outside, and they're about here, right on the outside. He does have a camera shining down on them, and he sees them. They are dressed in police uniforms, police cap. They look like cops. They say they're cops, and they say they're here to investigate a disturbance. It's not out of the realm that somebody else saw the kids jump over in the fence, and they called the police, and that's what these cops are doing to come to investigate. This is all split-second thinking in his mind. Rick has never been, he's been suspected, but never been charged with anything as involvement in this case. Yet some of the things that he does that night are truly peculiar and give me rise to the belief that he knew something. So the first thing he does, the first mistake he makes, he knows he's not supposed to let anybody in under any circumstances. He rings the entry. I think the entry is here. And the two men dressed as cops come in, and they come right here in front in the public area, and he's back here. And the first thing they say to him, let me say a couple of things to him. The first thing they say is, who else is here? And he says, one other guy. He said, call him down. This is the trombone player who's doing the second rounds. He calls him down, and then they look at him and they say to him, hey, you look familiar. We have a warrant out for you? And Rick, what they were saying is, and what Rick believed they were saying, is that they thought he was someone who hadn't shown up for some criminal court case, and he was vulnerable to being arrested. But he knew he had never been arrested in Massachusetts. It was a true case of mistaken identity as they're looking at him. So he says, no, I've never been arrested here. You don't want to say anything that I've never been arrested in Massachusetts. And they say, again, he's back here. You look familiar. Step away from back here and come out here so we can get a good look at you. And Rick does. Now, Rick does, knowing that stepping away from the back of this security desk totally nullifies any ability that he has to alert the outside world that the place is about to be robbed. The museum had one alarm, one emergency alarm, and it was right here. And if he hit that, an outside security firm would be notified there was an emergency at the museum, and they would respond. They'd call police. But Rick, thinking, no, there's nothing wrong here, let me just step away and show them who I am. I kept saying, why, Rick? Why would you do that when you knew you were denying any chance for you to hit the button? And he said, well, you know I'm a big rock and roller. I said, yes, I know that, Rick. And he says, I had a ticket that night, performance of the Grateful Dead in Hartford, Connecticut. And I knew that if I didn't go along with what I'm still thinking, he's still thinking they're cops. If I don't go along with what they're saying, they're going to arrest me and bring me to jail. And this again is early Monday morning, early Sunday morning, 1 o'clock in the morning. I won't get to see my concert that I have a ticket for in Hartford, Connecticut. And I don't want to chance that. So I do what they say. He steps away, comes out, they wrap him up, they put him in handcuffs, and then they do duct tape around his face and his eyes. And they bring him downstairs. They're pretty tough stuff that he had to face down there. Sat there for 5 or 6 hours longer. The second guard came in. They did the same thing to him. They brought them both downstairs, set them up in different places. And then, this is now 1:20 in the morning, and they spend about another hour, and spend 81 minutes in all inside the museum. And even though this had a lot of guile and sophistication to it, the way they stole the artwork is totally different. This is brutality. Every frame, front of frame that had glass in it was broken. They go up to the Dutch room, which is on the second floor, which you'll go to tomorrow. I'll show you what the place looks like now. It's a room about this size, and when you enter it, you feel like you're entering into a wake, because it's a feeling of loss is so strong when you enter the room, and I'll show you why. But this is the next morning, police officer looking at the remnants, at the crime scene. Every frame is broken, and these two Rembrandts, big Rembrandts, including the Sea of Galilee, the paintings were slit out of their backings. So it gives the investigators some idea that this could not have been done to satisfy, I mean, the Hollywood view is there is a crime king or queen who cannot live without one of these paintings, and therefore commissions this kind of theft to get the bad guys to go in and pull off this theft. There was a movie called Thomas Crown Affair with, no, the later one, Pierce Brosnan. There's no Pierce Brosnan. There's no Hollywood actors in this. These are all thugs. And the way they steal it and the way they break things, they're thugs. But they get the big art pieces from the Dutch room. They then head into the short gallery, which is also on the second floor. And they try their damnedest. This is all on the second floor. This is the Dutch room. They try their damnedest to get this Napoleonic banner. This is the short gallery. It's a small gallery on the second floor of the museum. They climb up on this piece here to get to this piece. And this piece is held in place with 8 tiny, tiny screws. They get 6 of the screws out, and they can't get the final 2 screws out. Interestingly enough, for me, they don't break, this is glass, they don't break it and rip out the banner. They leave the banner. But right here, and they don't notice this until the museum was about to open 2 days later, they've cleaned up the entire crime scene, all the evidence is gathered, but they're vacuuming all the rooms before they've opened them, before they open the museum for attendance again. And the vacuum cleaner, click, 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 picks up, and they open it up, and they see these 6 tiny screws that had been dropped on the ground. And they go up, and they see the thing had been kept in place by 2 screws left that the bad guys couldn't get out. But they do notice, wait a second, where's our finial? They took this. They grabbed this. This is a top of a flag. You've got one, okay? Uh-huh. Christine, can we talk a little bit later? Looks very familiar. Well, this is a historic piece. They took that, and it remains missing, as does all the 13 pieces remain missing. 27 years later, nothing has been recovered. No one has been arrested, and the FBI has told me this 7 years ago, that they hadn't had a proof of life sighting of any of the pieces of art. What a proof of life sighting means in FBI talk is they haven't had someone come in with a remnant. They've had people that came from any of the pieces that were stolen. They've had a lot of fraudsters and con people con men come in and say, listen, I know something, give me $10,000 and I'll go to my friends and I'll get you your paintings back. Well, what the museum and the FBI says, prove you know something. Give me a photograph of the paintings or the artwork as they are now, or bring me in a remnant that I can ascribe to one of these pieces. Well, they've never had that. So, yet, in the past 10 years, the FBI has issued this pledge, in writing. Bring the artwork back. We won't arrest you. In fact, we'll drive you to the museum, and there's a $5 million reward, now raised to $10 million from this, second part of 2017, it's $10 million. We'll give you the reward. No questions asked. Just bring back our artwork. Yet, neither that has that or the others promises, pledges of reward and no prosecution have returned anything. So you can see why this is such a compelling mystery to me. Well, I started to write my book in 2014. In the summer of 2014, I got a call at home. I live in, my residence is in Manamet, and I got a call, and it was on my home phone. Usually people know me, call my cell. And this guy said, hey, I understand you're investigating the Gardner Museum case. And I said, I am. And he says, well, what's your theory? And I said, I'm just a reporter. I just report what other people think. So he said, well, what does the FBI think? And I told him what he thinks, and he says, no, that's not it. These paintings were stolen as a to gain a get out of jail free card. And I said, and I had heard about this expression, paintings of this importance, Rembrandt's, Vermeer, of this magnitude, they shock our sensitivity, our feeling of safety, that our historic art pieces are protected. That when something like this gets stolen, you know, the legal part of society feels, what the hell, nothing's safe if they can do this. So in order to get them back, the underworld believes, the authorities will give you a break. We'll let your brother out of jail. Well, you know that criminal associate who's facing indictment? We won't indict him. Just bring it back. So I heard about this, and I had done some investigative work on it, and I did some research back into the early 70s. This idea came about. And it came about because of a guy named Miles Connor, who was a lower level, but an art thief. Pretty good one. Miles had gotten, he had broken in with a partner to an estate up in Maine, and they had stolen 5 Wyeth paintings, Andrew and his father, N.C. Wyeth. Beautiful paintings. And he brought them down. Miles, like every other thief, is smarter than the rest of us. Smartest guy in the world. Most cunning. So he says to he finds the guy he thought it was a perfect fence, and they're going to sell it to the fence. They're going to do the deal down in Cape Cod. Miles shows up with the paintings. The guy shows up with the money. The guy gives Miles the money. Miles goes to his trunk, takes out the paintings. Well, the perfect fence turns into a perfect FBI agent. Miles gets arrested and thrown in jail. He's facing 8 years. He gets bailed, and he comes up with this grand idea. Let me steal something. Let my gang steal something out of the MFA. And they go with guns into the MFA, and they steal a Rembrandt off the wall, mid-70s, now mid-73. They bring it out to the van, and they take off with it. They hide the painting beneath the bed of a mother of one of the girlfriends of the band, and they leave it there. And they leave it there for about a year. And a year later, Miles goes to his lawyer, still hasn't faced sentencing on his Maine robbery, says to his lawyer, Marty, he says, tell the FBI I can get that Rembrandt back for them that was stolen out of the MFA. He says, what do you know about that? He says, don't ask me any questions. Tell the authorities I'll get them their but they got to give me a deal. Got to give me a break on my case because I'm facing 8 years. So the lawyer goes to the feds, and the fed says, hey, we don't make deals with con artists or con men or criminals. Tell him, bring the painting back, and he can tell it to the judge. So Miles, thinking he has a deal, brings the paintings back and tells it to the judge. The judge says, you get 8 years on the main case, and you get another 8 years for the MFA case. But he lets them see it. He does let them serve it together, so it's a 1 8-year sentence. But in the underworld, that is considered proof positive. It's bullshit. But you can't tell them anything. You know, I do a lot of reporting with bad guys and sat with them because they're interested in finding the artwork. With a $10 million reward, you know, they don't have to go to jail to make $10 million in this. All they have to do is con one of their con artist friends. So the fellow who's calling me at my home tells me, you know, in the late 80s, late 89 in fact, November, you can look this up, and I did, a fellow named Vinnie Ferraro was arrested and put in jail for racketeering by the FBI. And you don't know this, but let me tell you, you can confirm it, and I did. One of the first people that visited Vinnie Ferraro in jail was his second in command, a fellow who drove him around all day, Bobby Donati out of Revere. And Bobby said to him, we're going to get you out of jail. We're going to pull off a theft that's so shocking that the feds will do business with us and we'll ask for your release. So this guy says, Vinny said to him, don't do it. I'm here for racketeering. I'm not getting out. And he didn't. He served 15 years for the racketeering charge. The guy came back to him 3 months after the theft and said, we did it. We're going to start negotiations. But the heat's too hot right now. The feds are looking to arrest us. So we're going to bury him, and then we'll let things cool down. Well, that guy was assassinated in early '91. So if he had a role in this, in fact, I brought all this information to the FBI, and they appreciated it. They looked at it. I don't think they got any big leads out of it. But be that as it may, I'm always convinced that this get out of jail free card was the reason was that this artwork was stolen. The feds are more convinced it's this fellow here, Bobby Gentile. Bobby Gentile is a low-level mobster, mob associate, let me say. He works at used car lots. And he was interested in the theft. He was interested in finding the artwork to get, at the time, the $5 million reward. And he was doing that with a very good friend of his, up in Maine, who was a bigger mob associate down here in Boston and up in Maine. That fellow passed away in 2004, 6 years later. Now this is, 2010, 20 years after the theft. The mobster's widow, goes to the FBI. She has learned there's a $5 million reward. Somehow she didn't know about it. She goes to the feds and says to them, my husband had those paintings, but he gave them to his best friend, Bobby Gentile. And Bobby Gentile has them hidden in his house in Manchester, Connecticut. Well, the feds appreciated what she was telling them. And it's a big lead. And they asked her, how do you remember this? And she said, well, it was after a lunch. The two couples, my husband and I, and Bobby and his wife, went out to lunch at a seafood restaurant in Portland, Maine. And afterwards, they did the transfer of the paintings. I never saw them, but I know that's what happened. So the feds go to Bobby Gentile. They go to his house in Manchester, Connecticut, and they said, Bobby, we know something now, and we want to search your house. And Bobby says, I didn't know what she's talking about. I do remember the lunch. I paid for it. She had twin lobsters. Who has twin lobsters for lunch? My best friend's widow had. My best friend's wife had. So he said, but I don't know anything. Well, they set him up in a crime, and he falls for it. They send in a fellow undercover, and the guy tries to buy a gun from Bobby. Bobby won't sell him a gun, but he does give him some Percocets that he has in the house, and you can't. That's prescription drugs. And you can't give anybody unless they're, you know, they have it. You got to get the prescription drugs yourself. So Bob, the feds come in and they arrest Bobby, and they do a search of his house, and they do a search of his backyard, and they leave this shed. This is they do this in May 2012. This photo was taken months later in January 2014. But they can't find anything. But when they go down in the basement, and Bobby's got stacks of papers. Mobsters, they save everything. They don't throw away nothing. They don't throw away anything. In fact, one mob associate, as he sees me pouring a glass of wine, he says, "We throw away the bottle, but we keep the cork." He said, "You never know when somebody's going to need something that you have, and you become in the driver's seat." So they go into Bobby's basement, and they find a piece of paper tucked into the Boston Herald that was reporting the crime back in 1990. Why Bobby kept that? Bobby later says, "I kept the painting and the piece of paper because I was interested in getting the paintings so I could gain the if I had $5 million reward. If I had the paintings, I'd give them back. I never had them." Well, as I say, the feds don't believe him, so they begin this search of his property. His son comes home. Bobby's in jail on the Percocet case. And his son comes home, and they see them going throughout the house, throughout the yard. And the son says, "You listen, if my father had anything," my father's not an art thief. He would not have art. But if he had anything that was important, it would be in the shed. Shed. We don't have a warrant for the shed. They need warrants to search everything. So they go perfect the warrant, and then they go into the shed. And this is what they find. It's just like the sheds in our houses, except it has these big Rubbermaid bins. And they bring everything out onto the lawn and nothing. They don't see any evidence of anything. So they go back into the house and they say to the boy, "There's nothing in there." And the boy says, "No, not in the shed, under the shed." "What do you mean under the shed?" "Well, that's a false floor. My father has a ditch under it. And whatever my father felt was important, stolen most stuff, he would put in the bins, cover the bins, and then put it in the ditch, and then put the false floor back." Feds go back out, pull up the false floor, and lo and behold, a ditch and two bins, both covered. At that moment in time, they think they've got it. May 1, 2012. They pull them up, both empty. The boy comes outside, and he says, and they look at him, they say, what's your father doing? What's going on here? And the boy said, "You know, I don't believe my father was involved. But if he was, and he had the paintings, I can only remember a few years back there was a flood in our backyard. And that flood was so much water, it got into the ditch and into the bins. And whatever was in those bins was ruined." So feds go to Bobby's jail cell, they pull him out. "Bobby, we'll let you out. We'll get you the $5 million. We know the canvases are ruined, but we need this case to be solved now. Give us those canvases. Fess up. How did you get them?" Bobby shakes his head. In fact, he starts to cry. And he says, "You think I'd deny my family $5 million? I don't know anything about this case. I wanted to get them, but I never had them. My best friend never had them, and I certainly never had them." So the feds put him back in jail, and he gets out in 2014, and that's when I come to see him. I went to his lawyer, and I knocked on his door, and I had 5 hours worth of meetings with him in his house in Manchester, Connecticut. And he talks, and he talks, and he denies, and he denies, and he gives me a little bit, and then he denies. But he denies any involvement in the case. And he tells me all about this search of the property and the search of the shed and all. It's a great chapter. The Rembrandt's in the Shed is a great chapter of the book. So at the end of 5 hours of interviewing over 3 days of time, we'll walk into the front door. And he's a big man, big stocky man, old. He's now 82. And he says to me, "Shut off your tape recorder." I said, "Yeah." I didn't realize I had it. I shut it off. I said, "What?" He said, "You know, I've told you all this stuff. No one knows this stuff. And I'm rolling my eyes thinking, yeah, but you haven't told me anything that's important. You haven't told me the secret. So I said, yeah. He said, well, what do I get out of it? Oh, so I looked at him. I said, Bobby, your lawyer told you I'm a reporter. I don't have any money. I don't have any money. What are you asking me that? And then I start thinking quickly. I said, maybe he thinks I'm an undercover FBI agent. You know, every other person who's come into this house has turned out to be an undercover FBI agent. Maybe he thinks I am, and therefore he doesn't want to acknowledge or admit anything that could be incriminating because I'll put the cuffs on him. So I said, Bobby, I got to tell you, I had nothing to do with the FBI. I'm a reporter. I write what people tell me. Bobby, let me tell you something. He said, I got no money. I said, Bobby, let me tell you something. You tell me the truth. I'll give the publisher back his advance that he gave me, not all the money of the world, for my book, Master Thieves, but let you and me do a book. And you'll get millions. But you got to tell me, enough of this denial. Forget that. Give me the truth. When did you get the paintings? What happened to them? Where are they now? You tell me that, Bobby, I'll confirm it, and we got a bestseller. We got a masterpiece. So I'm thinking to myself, what am I doing saying these things like this to him? You know, he's been spent the last 5 hours denying everything. You know, if you ever sit with a reporter, you know that the reporter sits and he talks, she or he talks to you. They ask you the logical questions as to why they came to visit you and why you're talking to them. And at the end, they don't say, now, you've told me everything, but forget all that. Tell me your deepest, darkest secret. Tell me the family secrets. They don't do that. You know, we're professional. We sort of ask the questions that brought us to your door. But here I am asking him to tell me the darkest secret of his life. So I'm thinking, this guy is going to laugh at me. You know, what am I doing saying this thing? But he doesn't laugh at me. Instead, he puts his head down. Like I say, he's a stocky guy. And I am absolutely amazed. And I don't know what to say, because this is totally against every other way I do my interviewing. You know, I said to tell what I know, how they could help me. Now, with what they're telling me, how can they help me some more? And if they want to be off the record, then be off the record. But let's build some sort of cooperation here. And I'm telling him, Bobby, you can make a lot of money if you cooperated with me, and I wrote this book with you. And he kept his head down, and so all I can do is count. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. And I get to about 3, and I say, did I count 2? And I go back to I get to about 10. And he puts his head up, and he looks me right in the eye, and it's no. I could see right away. So I said, well, thank you, Bobby, for considering it. If you ever do want to tell the whole story, the true story. No, I told you it. I never had it. Okay, Bobby, say it. So I go out to my car and I call his lawyer and I said, Ryan, he's been lying to you in denying everything. He's lying whenever he denies everything. And the lawyer says, what are you talking about? He's denied it to the feds. He's denied it to the FBI. He's denied it to me. He's denied it to everyone. Why do you think he has them? And I tell them about putting his head down. And he said, well, how long did he put his head down? And I said, it had to be 10 seconds. Okay, Steve, let me tell you what he was doing during that 10 seconds. He was thinking, can I con this reporter to give me $10,000? And I'll promise him that I'll give him the secrets of the ages. But Steve, he doesn't have them. Bobby's back in jail. The feds sent, a month after I was there, the feds did send someone in, a friend of his. Friend of his was working for the FBI. Bobby didn't know it. And Bobby agreed to get involved in a drug deal. And which Bobby got indicted on later. But at the end of that conversation, that's just a month after I was there, the undercover friend, undercover agent, says to Bobby, he says, Bobby, the big guys, they don't want you in this drug deal. They say you're too hot. You know, if you get in, the feds will go, they'll break in, and the whole thing will blow up. Bobby says to him, you tell your big boy friends, if they let me in, I'll sell them 2 paintings for $500,000. So, is he conned, or does he have anything? Well, Bobby's back in jail. And he's pled out to those charges. They did another search. They found more guns. In fact, he sold a gun and a silencer. He was going to sell silencers. They found silencers in the house. He continues to deny that he has any information. And the most sort of poignant moment came when Bobby was on his deathbed. He's better now. He's well now. But in September 2016, Bobby was on his deathbed. He was in a federal prison clinic, a hospital in South Carolina, and his lawyer went down to see him and said, "Bobby, if you're ever going to say it now, because you know you're close to death." And Bobby and there's a $5 million reward, as you know. And Bobby said, "I don't care if it's $100 million. Don't have the paintings." And his lawyer says, "Bobby, you know, 100 years from now, there'll be more Bobby Gentiles." And this guy's name, the lawyer's name is Ryan McGuigan. There'll be more Ryan McGuigans defending the Bobby Gentiles. But there's only one Rembrandt. And he produced masterpieces. And several of those masterpieces are missing from the Gardner Museum. So if you have them, understand the importance. And Bobby shakes his head. And like I say, he's better now, but he's still denying everything. So what do we know? You know, we still got nothing to show for all this hard work the FBI has put into it, the museum has put into it, reporters like myself have put into it. I came, you know, as I finished my book, I thought to myself, you know, yeah, I got some interesting nuggets here, but I haven't helped what I wanted to help get the paintings back. Remember I said these had a higher purpose to be on the story, had a higher purpose to get the recovery. And I thought about that, and I was speaking to a French detective who had helped solve a big case, a big art theft case in the mid-'80s, early '90s in Paris. And I said to him, what's the difference between how did you solve your case, yet Boston hasn't been able to solve its case? And he says, the major difference is how your public feels about this theft. And I said, okay, go ahead. And he says, when your public considers it a hell of a mystery, but it's a criminal case, it's a mystery. Ours was a personal loss. When ours happened, when these Impressionist paintings were stolen from this museum in Paris in 1986, 85, 86, it was like every Parisian had lost the family's jewels. Everyone felt it personally. Your public doesn't feel it, doesn't feel this loss, yet the stuff that was stolen from your museum was the greatest of art that has ever been lost and remains missing. Your public has to feel it personally. I thought about that, and that was the summer of 2014. It was the summer of the Ice Bucket Challenge. Remember, our kids was pouring water, grandkids pouring water over their heads to raise money for ALS research. And I thought to myself, that's the kind of attention that has to be put to this case, is to have the public understand the importance of this loss to us. These paintings were put on the walls, remember I said an hour ago, for us. She wanted these paintings to inspire us. So what I came up with is this. Hasn't been accepted as a recommendation by the museum or the feds, but what I say is instead of having the museum or the FBI, this is what you'll see tomorrow. This is why I think of it as a wake when you go into the museum, into the Dutch room. This is where the Vermeer was, and this is where the Storm of the Sea of Galilee was, the empty frames. I say put in front of these empty frames Cardinal O'Malley, Boston Mayor Marty Walsh, not because they're political or they're well known, but because they have biographies of redemption and recovery. They have cachet, credibility in the good guy world and the bad guy world. And have them say something like this. These paintings were put on the walls for our parents and grandparents and us, and our children haven't seen them. It's true. It's been gone for 27 years. Our kids haven't seen them. Now another generation is going to come. Now our grandkids aren't going to see them. Understand, there's a class difference in Boston as there is in every major city. They're the good guy. There is the civilized society, and then there's the uncivilized. And it's the class differences. And the people who are criminals don't do anything to pick up the phone and give a tip if they know something, because to do it is considered snitching, ratting. Well, so be it. But understand, by your not giving the secret as to where these paintings are, your children and grandchildren are not going to see these paintings. And let me tell you, Michelangelo, Rembrandt, Vermeer, they were not from this strata of society. They were more this or this. So, you know, criminal underworld, understand, you too have families. You too have children who appreciate art. And you too have a child that could be inspired here. And that's why get on the phone. Yes, there's a $10 million reward awaiting you, but there's also a sense of strengthening of the city that needs to happen. There won't be any duck boat parades when they got the paintings back. You know, we're not talking about finding Tom Brady's Super Bowl winning jersey. You know, God forbid. There would be torchlight parades to looking for that jersey if it was still missing. No, we're talking about something that's more important to us as a society, and that's this artwork. It was put on the wall to complete us, and it needs to be back. And that's what I would have people with credibility in the bad guy world to be saying. And let's hope, because nothing good comes from just the frames. And a world of difference comes from the artwork that should be back in the frames. Well, thank you very much. Again, I have my book for sale here for $15. I'll inscribe it, and I'll answer any questions you might have.